The moment you stop needing their approval is the moment their control over you begins to disappear. There's a certain kind of pull that doesn't need touch to be felt, a quiet tension that lingers in the air, where silence speaks louder than words and distance somehow feels more intense than closeness. It's the kind of connection that once made you question yourself, that kept you emotionally tied even when you tried to walk away. But what happens when that same energy no longer controls you? When the pull fades and you finally stand still while everything else tries to draw you back in? A narcissist's final move only shows itself when they realize they no longer control your mind. When a narcissist understands that you are no longer easy to influence, something shifts inside them in a quiet but powerful way. They do not feel proud of your progress or respect your growth. Instead, they feel deeply uneasy. When they see you as too strong, too aware, and too independent, they often attempt one last harmful trick, revealing something deeply disturbing about narcissistic behavior that many people never notice until it happens to them personally and leaves them confused and shaken for a long time. When narcissists finally accept that their old methods no longer work on you, they rarely leave in peace. Instead, they prepare one final move designed to shake you at your core and disturb your sense of reality. This last action can undo months or even years of healing if you are not ready for it or if you do not understand what is happening. If you fail to recognize the pattern, you may fall straight into their trap without even realizing it. That is what makes this stage so dangerous, because it often feels familiar, yet something about it feels deeply wrong and unsettling. Before this final move appears, there is usually a period of silent psychological tension that builds slowly over time. The greatest fear of a narcissist is not rejection, and it is not abandonment in the normal sense. Their deepest fear is the moment when the person they once controlled becomes mentally and emotionally stronger than they are. This moment threatens the false image they have created to survive in the world. It shakes the identity they depend on, and it forces them to face something they have avoided for a very long time, which is their own inner weakness. Narcissists rely on an illusion of superiority to feel stable and secure. They need to believe they are more powerful, more important, and more dominant than the people around them in order to maintain their sense of self. Narcissists cannot face their own flaws or weaknesses in an honest way. Instead, they push those weaknesses onto others. They accuse, blame, and criticize, so they never have to look within themselves. This pattern allows them to protect their fragile ego, even if it causes harm to the people closest to them who are simply trying to live in peace. When you begin healing, something very important starts to change inside you. Healing does not always look dramatic or obvious from the outside. It can be quiet and steady. You begin trusting your own thoughts again without constantly seeking approval. You stop over-explaining yourself to people who do not listen. You set boundaries without feeling guilt. You say no without fear of losing someone. You no longer react in the same emotional way you used to. To you, it feels like growth and clarity. To the narcissist, it feels like a loss of control that they cannot accept or ignore. This moment creates a reversal of power that they can clearly sense. The balance that once favored the narcissist suddenly shifts in a way they cannot fully understand but can strongly feel. They notice it immediately, even if they cannot put it into clear words. Narcissists are not searching for deep connection or mutual respect. They are searching for control over emotions and attention. They look for people whose feelings they can influence, whose focus they can capture, and whose sense of self they can shape slowly over time until it depends on them. Narcissists live through an inflated ego that must be constantly supported. This is a fragile mental state where they must keep proving their importance again and again to avoid facing their inner emptiness. They cannot sit with themselves in silence because silence forces reflection. They cannot tolerate deep self-awareness. They need reactions from others to feel real and to feel like they exist in a meaningful way. Without those reactions, they begin to feel unstable, and that instability creates panic beneath the surface that they try to hide from everyone. When you were uncertain, when you doubted yourself, and when you looked to them for approval, you fulfilled their needs perfectly without even realizing it. Your confusion made them feel powerful. Your need for reassurance made them feel important. Your willingness to explain yourself again and again made them feel superior. You were not truly loved as a complete person with your own identity. Instead, you were used as a source of validation that kept their fragile sense of self from falling apart under pressure. But the moment you begin standing in your own truth, everything starts to change in a way that cannot be reversed easily. When you stop chasing their approval and start listening to your own inner voice, you no longer fit the role they had created for you. At this stage, the narcissist experiences a quiet form of panic that grows stronger with time. They may not show it openly, but inside their identity begins to crack. You are no longer predictable. You are no longer easy to influence. You are no longer afraid of their silence or their anger like before. This is the moment when they reach for the most dangerous tool they have used in the past, but now apply in a deeper and more intense way. This tactic has been warned about because of how destructive it can be to a person's sense of reality. It is a form of psychological projection taken to an extreme level. When narcissists feel their control slipping away, they stop using simple tactics like basic gaslighting or open blame. Instead, they launch a deeper attack aimed directly at your identity and your sense of self. They begin projecting everything they cannot accept about themselves onto you in a very convincing way. Suddenly, they accuse you of being manipulative without reason. They call you selfish even when you are setting healthy boundaries. They say you are cold, cruel, or unstable without evidence. The qualities they describe often have nothing to do with who you truly are as a person. In reality, they are describing their own inner world, but placing it onto you so they do not have to face it themselves. This final phase is especially dangerous because it is subtle and often hidden behind emotions that seem real on the surface. It usually comes wrapped in concern, sadness, or a form of fake vulnerability that is hard to detect at first. They may say they are worried about you, that you have changed, or that you are not the same person anymore. They may suggest that your healing is actually harmful. They might even imply that therapy, boundaries, or self-respect have made you worse instead of better. The goal behind this behavior is simple but very cruel in its effect. They want you to doubt your growth and question your progress. They want you to feel unsure about the changes you have made. They want you to return to the version of yourself that they could easily control and influence without resistance. This attack targets the process of individuation, which is the journey of becoming your true self, separate from outside control and false roles that were forced onto you over time. When you are going through individuation, you are no longer defined by other people's expectations or demands. You begin to see yourself clearly and make decisions based on your own values. This is exactly what the narcissist fears the most, because it means they no longer have access to your inner world in the same way. As you continue to grow, their attempts may become more intense or more emotional, but the pattern remains the same. They are trying to pull you back into a place where they feel powerful again. If you are not aware of this pattern, it can slowly confuse you and make you question everything you have worked so hard to build. You may start wondering if they are right about you. You may feel the urge to defend yourself or explain your actions once again. This is where many people get pulled back into the cycle without noticing it. The key difference now is awareness. When you can see what is happening clearly, their words begin to lose their power over you. Staying grounded in your truth becomes the most important step during this stage. You do not need to prove who you are to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. You do not need to explain your growth to someone who benefits from your confusion. The more you stay calm and clear, the less control they have over your emotional state. Over time, their final move begins to fail because it no longer creates the reaction they are trying to get from you. In the end, this final move is not a sign of their strength. It is a sign of their desperation and fear of losing control. It shows that your growth is real and that your independence is becoming stronger than their influence. While it may feel intense and confusing in the moment, it is also a clear turning point. It is the moment where you fully step out of their control and into your own sense of self, where their tactics no longer define your reality or your worth. For a narcissist, this feels like abandonment, even if you are still physically present and nothing on the surface has changed. They begin to feel exposed because your clarity quietly highlights their inner emptiness in a way they cannot ignore. Instead of facing that feeling honestly, they try to pull you back into confusion where they feel more comfortable. They may bring up old memories, past mistakes, or moments when you were vulnerable and unsure. They may rewrite history and claim they were the ones supporting you all along, even when that is not true, creating doubt where you once had clarity. They may suddenly act kind, reflective, or even apologetic in a way that feels convincing at first. This is not real accountability or true change. It is bait carefully designed to pull you back into the old dynamic. They are testing whether you still doubt yourself enough to re-engage with them emotionally. If you respond with strong feelings, if you try to explain yourself again or defend your choices, they feel a sense of control returning. That small reaction is enough for them to believe they still have access to your mind and emotions, even if only for a moment. This final trick often works because it touches a very deep emotional level inside you that is hard to ignore. You may begin to feel guilt without fully understanding why it appears so suddenly. You may feel responsible for their pain, even when you have done nothing wrong. You may wonder if you really did change in a negative way, or if your growth somehow hurt them. These thoughts can quietly pull you back into confusion. This is exactly why awareness is so important, because without it, these feelings can slowly take over your thinking. Growth often looks threatening to people who benefit from your silence and your self-doubt. Healing does not make you heartless or uncaring in any way. It makes you clear about what you accept and what you no longer tolerate. Boundaries do not mean cruelty or rejection. They mean self-respect and self-protection. When you begin to understand this difference deeply, their words start to lose their effect. You begin to see that their reactions are not about you becoming worse, but about them losing the control they once depended on to feel secure. When projection is recognized for what it truly is, it begins to lose its power over you in a steady way. The moment you see that their accusations are reflections of their own inner struggle and not your truth, something shifts inside you. The confusion starts to fade. The emotional weight begins to lift. Narcissists rely heavily on confusion to maintain control over others. Clarity is their greatest weakness because it removes the illusion they have been building. Once you see clearly, their tactics no longer feel as convincing as they once did before. When you stop defending yourself against false accusations, they begin to feel exposed in a way they cannot handle. When you refuse to argue with distorted versions of reality, they lose the momentum they depend on. When you stay grounded in your own understanding of what is real, their strategies slowly collapse. This is why the narcissist's final move often appears intense and emotional on the surface. It is not a sign of strength or confidence. It is a sign of desperation and fear of losing control over something they once had. They are fighting to preserve an identity that was built on control rather than truth or connection. They are trying to avoid facing themselves and the emptiness they have been running from for so long. Your calm presence, your silence when needed, and your quiet confidence are not acts of cruelty. They are proof that you have outgrown the role they needed you to play in their life. You are no longer reacting in the same way, and that alone changes the entire dynamic in a way they cannot reverse easily. If you recognize this final trick clearly, you protect your healing in a powerful way. You stop trying to be understood by someone who benefits from misunderstanding you again and again. You stop explaining your growth to someone who fears it and tries to weaken it. You begin to choose peace over chaos, even when it feels unfamiliar at first. This choice may feel uncomfortable in the beginning, but over time it becomes natural and steady, giving you a sense of control over your own life that cannot be taken away. True strength does not come from controlling others or proving your worth repeatedly. It comes from integrating your sense of self and standing firmly in it without needing constant validation. When you continue walking forward without engaging in their final manipulation, you complete a cycle they cannot follow or understand. The narcissist may leave for a while, or they may return later with new tactics that seem different on the surface, but follow the same pattern underneath. But once you see the pattern clearly, it begins to lose its hold on you completely. You are no longer reacting from fear, confusion, or the need to prove yourself. You are responding from awareness and clarity, which changes everything. That is the moment their control truly ends, even if they continue trying in small ways. Your response becomes steady, and their influence becomes weaker with time until it no longer affects your decisions or your emotional state in the same way as before. Here is what this situation truly looks like and why it can be so dangerous, especially when you do not see it coming in advance. When they notice that you have become stronger, that strength itself becomes their main target in a very direct way. In the past, they focused on pointing out your weaknesses and making you feel small. They mocked your fears, your doubts, your kindness, and your need for approval from others in ways that made you question yourself. Now everything shifts once they see that you are no longer easily controlled or influenced. They change their focus completely in a calculated way. Instead of attacking what was broken in you before, they begin attacking what you have repaired through your own effort and awareness. They do this because your strength is the one thing they cannot tolerate or control. It is the one thing that prevents them from having power over you again in the same way they once did. These words are not spoken randomly or without thought. Every sentence is designed to make you doubt yourself in a subtle but effective way. What makes this even more unsettling is that this criticism is very precise and targeted. They do not attack random parts of your personality without direction. They go after the exact areas where you have grown the most and where you have become stronger in a healthy way that protects you. If you have learned to say no when something does not feel right, they label you as uncaring or selfish. If you finally speak up for yourself after staying silent for so long, they call you aggressive or difficult to deal with. If you have built real confidence through effort and reflection, they accuse you of thinking you are better than everyone else around you. If you protect your time and energy carefully, they say you have become distant or heartless without understanding your reasons. They want you to compare who you are now with who you were when you were easier to control and influence. If you are not careful, this can slowly begin to work on your mind. You may start to doubt yourself in small ways at first. You may begin to feel nostalgic for a time when things seemed simpler, even if they were not truly better. You may confuse peace with silence and stability with self-denial. You might even begin missing the person you were when you had less awareness and fewer boundaries without realizing what that version of you had to endure. That is where the real danger lies, because the past can be turned into a trap when it is painted as happier than it actually was. It becomes easy to forget the confusion, the stress, and the emotional pressure you experienced during that time. You begin remembering only the moments that feel safe while ignoring the patterns that caused harm. This selective memory can pull you back into a cycle you worked hard to leave. It creates a false sense of comfort that hides the truth of what was really happening beneath the surface. They know your heart and your emotional patterns very well from past experience. They understand what makes you feel responsible and what triggers your desire to help others. They are aware of your compassion, sometimes even more than you are aware of it yourself, and they use that understanding carefully. Suddenly, they are struggling with something serious. Suddenly, something has gone wrong in their life that requires attention. It could be a personal issue, financial trouble, family conflict, emotional pain, or fear of losing something important. They hope you will feel guilty for prioritizing yourself and your healing over their needs. They want you to believe that being strong means abandoning them in a time of difficulty. They create situations where you feel forced to choose between your growth and their comfort. In many cases, these problems are not as accidental as they seem on the surface. They often create or worsen the situations they later ask you to help fix, even if they never admit it openly. They make choices that lead to confusion or chaos in their own life. They ignore responsibilities or delay important decisions. They damage their own stability in ways that create stress. Then they turn to you, asking for help, understanding, or sacrifice as if you are the only one who can solve the problem. This serves a very clear purpose in their mind. It pulls you back into the role of caretaker, the role where you focus on them instead of yourself, and where they feel secure again. But what they truly want is not just help or support in that moment. They want proof of something deeper. They want proof that they still come before your boundaries and your self-respect. They want to see if you will break the limits you worked so hard to build over time. They ask you to do things you clearly said you would no longer do. They ask for favors that cross your personal limits. They push for closeness when you have asked for space and distance to protect your peace. Every exception is meant to open the door again to the dynamic you worked hard to leave behind. This is not really about the situation they are describing. It is about control and influence over your decisions. They are not asking for help because they are completely helpless. They are asking you to sacrifice your own needs to reassure them that they still matter more than your well-being. That reassurance is what they are truly seeking beneath the surface of their request. If you agree, even in a small way, the pattern begins to restart slowly. The boundaries you created start to blur again. The guilt you worked through begins to return. The strength you built over time starts to weaken under emotional pressure. If you give in at this stage, the cost is much higher than it appears. You do not just lose time or energy. You begin to lose trust in yourself and your ability to stay consistent with your own values. Healing does not make you cruel or distant in a negative way. It makes you clear about who you are and what you accept in your life. It helps you understand your limits and respect them without guilt. When you hold on to that clarity, even when it feels uncomfortable, you protect everything you have built. You step fully into a version of yourself that is no longer controlled by fear, confusion, or the need to please someone who never truly valued your wholeness. The narcissist learns this pattern about you over time and uses it to their advantage. Their crisis becomes the door back into your life, even if you had already created distance for your own well-being. The most important protection against this final form of manipulation is understanding a deeper and more balanced form of compassion. Real compassion does not mean sacrificing yourself without limits or ignoring your own needs. It does not mean you must fix what someone else refuses to face or take responsibility for in their own life. They may try to make your strength look like a flaw or a problem so that you begin to question it. They may suggest that you are becoming distant, uncaring, or difficult to be around. They may try to convince you that your independence is creating problems that did not exist before. These ideas are not based on truth. They are based on their need to return things to a state where they felt more powerful and secure. Once you see this clearly, their words begin to lose their emotional weight. The more you stay connected to your own understanding of yourself, the less their influence can reach you. You begin to see the difference between real concern and manipulation. You begin to recognize when someone is asking for help in a healthy way and when someone is trying to pull you back into a pattern that harms you. This awareness does not remove your compassion. It refines it, making it stronger and more balanced rather than overwhelming and self-destructive. It is not just access to your time that they are losing. It is access to your energy, your care, your attention, and your emotional effort. That loss feels threatening to them because it removes the control they once depended on. But for you, it is the doorway to peace and stability. It is the space where you can finally exist without constant pressure or confusion shaping your thoughts. The moment you stop being easy to control is the moment you begin living fully and honestly in your own way. You are no longer adjusting yourself to fit someone else's expectations. You are no longer abandoning your needs to keep someone else comfortable. You are simply choosing yourself in a steady and consistent way that builds real confidence over time. Thank you for staying present through this reflection and taking the time to understand these patterns more deeply. If this message connected with you or helped you see something more clearly than before, you may consider subscribing to the channel Narc Truth and sharing this message with someone who might need to hear it right now, especially if they are going through a similar experience and searching for clarity. In the end, this entire journey comes down to one clear truth. Your growth changes the dynamic, and not everyone will be comfortable with that change. When someone has been used to controlling your thoughts, your emotions, or your choices, your clarity will feel like a loss to them, even though it is a gain for you. Their reactions are not a reflection of your failure. They are a reaction to losing influence. The final tactics you experience are not signs of love, honesty, or real connection. They are attempts to restore a pattern that no longer serves you. Whether it appears as criticism, nostalgia, or sudden vulnerability, the goal remains the same: to make you question yourself and return to a version of yourself that was easier to control. Once you understand this, the confusion begins to fade, and you can see their behavior for what it truly is. Real strength is quiet, steady, and grounded. It does not need to argue, prove, or defend itself constantly. It stays firm even when emotions are high. It allows you to care without losing yourself, to walk away without guilt, and to choose peace without feeling selfish. This is the kind of strength that protects your growth and keeps you moving forward. You are not responsible for managing someone else's emotions at the cost of your own well-being. You are not required to explain your healing to someone who resists it, and you do not need to go back to who you were just to make someone else feel comfortable. Your responsibility is to yourself, to your clarity, and to the life you are building. When you stop reacting to pressure and start responding with awareness, everything changes. The patterns become visible. The emotional pull weakens, and the control that once felt strong begins to disappear. What once felt like obligation becomes a choice, and that choice is yours to make. Walking forward without engaging in old patterns is not cold or distant. It is growth. It is self-respect. It is freedom. And once you reach that point, there is nothing left for them to control, because you are no longer living from doubt, but from understanding.